Now let's generate an event that we will broadcast or we will be using to broadcast messages to the front end. And here I'm just going to do PHP artisan make event, and I'll call this event video upload progress and enter. Now that should have generated an event in app events video upload progress. Okay. And the first thing I want to do here is to implement the should broadcast now contract in the event to allow Laravel to broadcast this event. As it is, the event is created, but it's not yet enabled for broadcasting. So you can listen for it, but it will not be able to broadcast messages. So here I'm just going to say implement should broadcast now. And you see there's two ways to broadcast events here. You have should broadcast and should broadcast now. The difference is that if you do should broadcast, then the events will be queued. So they will be pushed to a queue and the broadcast will happen through processing the jobs in the queue. But in this case, when we are processing videos, we don't want to queue the events. We want to get real-time broadcasting of the progress of the video processing, so that as we get a new percentage value, that value is immediately sent to the client side without going through any queue. So we wouldn't want to delay the broadcast process. And that's why we are using should broadcast now. Then here we are going to leave everything else the same. But in the constructor for this event, we are going to accept the lecture that we are broadcasting or that we are processing the video for. So here I'm just going to use promoted properties and do public lecture. Then at the bottom, we have the broadcast on, and this is where we specify the channels that we want to broadcast this event on. So in this case, we are going to make it a private channel, so it will require authentication as we have already set up in our service provider. But also we will tie it to the ID of the lecture that we are broadcasting or that we are currently processing, so that an instructor can only listen for events for their specific lectures. So if you are an instructor, you should not be able to get events being broadcast for a different lecture in another course that you're not teaching. So we are going to set the name here as lecture. So that will be the name of the event that we listen for in the front end. And then we are going to concatenate the ID of the lecture to the name. All right. So it will be easy for us in the front end to simply look at the ID of the lecture and evaluate to be sure that the person listening to that event is the lecturer who owns, or is the instructor who owns that lecture. Then by default, when you broadcast events in Laravel, the broadcast name will be, or the event name that you get in the front end will be the class name. So in this case, I will just be listening for the video upload progress, but you can change that by implementing a method called should broadcast as. So public function broadcast as, and that should return a string. And here we just return the name that we want to broadcast this event as. Instead of using the class name, we want to provide a custom name for it. So I'm just going to call this video upload progress. So when we start implementing this in the front end, this is the event that we'll be listening for, video upload progress. Then we also need to provide the payload or the data that we want to send out to the user in the front end when we broadcast this message. So public function broadcast with, and this returns an array. And here we just need to return an array of the lecture, all right? An array of the lecture resource that we receive as input to this event. So we are going to return lecture resource make and this lecture. And to easily serialize the resource into an array, we just need to call resolve on that lecture class, okay? So if you just do this, you're going to have an error because this doesn't return an array, okay? It returns a lecture resource, but we want to serialize that into an array, so we call the resolve method on it, and that should serialize that into an array, which is what the broadcast method expects. All right, so we have the broadcasting set up. It looks good at the moment. And let's head over to our broadcast route. So if we remember in the in the configuration, so if you go to broadcast service provider, you see that the route that we're using for broadcasting is in the routes channels.php. So let's go to routes. We have the channels.php, and this is where we define the authentication mechanism. How do you authenticate users who want to listen to the events in the broadcasting? So there's an example here that if you broadcast on this channel, then you can easily evaluate, because the callback that you have in this route receives the authenticated user, but it also receives the ID that you pass in this process. In this case, we pass an ID in our event, which is the ID of the lecture that we want to listen for. So we can follow that example and just create another route for broadcast channel, and we set the name to be lecture dash the name or the ID of the lecture. Again, remember, this is what we defined in our broadcast class here. So it's lecture and then the ID of the lecture that we want to listen for, that we are processing. So we can receive that as a route parameter. And then in here, Laravel will pass in the authenticated user, and then it will resolve this lecture using root key binding. And so we can receive the lecture object directly in our callback here. And so here we can just specify the logic for how to evaluate who is able to listen to an event on this channel. And in this case, it is quite easy. We just need to return user ID equals lecture course user ID. Okay, so for users to be able to listen to that event, the user's ID must match the ID of the user who owns that course. So you must be the instructor of the course to listen to the event for that course. So that's it for setting up the broadcasting. And now over in the video processing job, we can actually fire that event when we process our video or when we get any update on the video processing. So over here in the on progress callback, we can now just do broadcast, and we are broadcasting a new video upload progress, which is the event that we just created, and that should take the lecture that the video belongs to. So this video, we are just going to do a refresh of the video so that it gets the most recent version of the video, and we want to get the lecture. So let's pull this in, and with that we should be able to start broadcasting some data. So let's quickly go to the terminal, and we are going to start soketi in debug mode so that we can see the messages that are coming through. And to start soketi in debug mode, we can go to the environment file and set a variable called soketi debug, and we set the value of that to true or to 1. So here we can just say soketi underscore debug, and we set the value to 1. And if we run soketi from this directory, from our project directory, it will look for this environment variable and it will run soketi in debug mode, which means we can actually see the messages coming through. So let's just do soketi start, enter, and now it's running in debug mode. We see there's more messages already showing up here, showing some of the information, the address that we are running on. And so when messages start coming through, we should be seeing the messages showing up there as well. Okay, so let's go back to our queues. Let me just kill the queues here and start my queue watcher. and we don't have anything to do here. But let's head over to Postman and upload the video again and see if the progress is being reported in the terminal. So over here, we still have our video selected. We're going to upload that in chunks, and of course that will be processed in our queue here. And if everything works well, we should see our WebSocket listening for the events that are being broadcast with the progress of the process. So let's come over here, send the request. The video is uploaded, and back to our terminal, we should see the job being processed. It's running. And over here in WebSocket, you see that we're actually receiving the messages as we process the job, okay? So our broadcast is working well, and these are the messages that we will be listening for in the front end. And you see that the broadcast messages are coming with the lecture and the ID of the lecture that this belongs to. So it's as easy as just listening for this event and getting the data in the front end, and we can then use that information to update the user in real time on the duration or on the progress of that process. Over here, the video has been successfully processed and it says done. So the messages have gone through and it's all done.